Pipeline at SeaWorld Orlando might be one of the most disappointing roller coasters I've ever ridden. So just like everyone else when this attraction was first announced, I was really disappointed and kind of upset with SeaWorld for adding a stand-up coaster in 2023. Like, what? But when the ride opened, a lot of people loved it, and I was like, really? Hearing people talk about standing airtime got me really excited, because B&M airtime coasters are some of my favorite roller coasters of all time. Well, my first roller coaster review on this channel was Diamondback at Kings Island, which of course is a B&M hyper coaster, and Diamondback is my favorite roller coaster I've ever ridden, so I got really excited to try out Pipeline. In 2023, when I visited Orlando, unfortunately I didn't get a chance to visit SeaWorld Orlando, but I am fortunate enough to have visited in 2024. When I visited SeaWorld, it was on July 5th. So the park was absolutely slammed. I was hoping to get as many rides as I could on Pipeline, but I could only manage 3. So I got 3 laps in on Pipeline. I wish I got more, but 3 is definitely a good amount to make a review video. Before we get started, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'm a pretty small coaster and theme park channel, so I appreciate every ounce of support. Thank you so much. One thing that's really notable about Pipeline is I love its presence along the water. I feel like it's great. It pretty much dominates that corner of the park, and when you get closer to the attraction, I love like the beachy music that they play, like the surf music. I feel like it brings a very unique vibe to SeaWorld Orlando, which I feel like they desperately needed, because a lot of their attractions are kind of the same in terms of aesthetic and in terms of atmosphere and vibe. Like Kraken, Manta, and Mako feel pretty similar to be around, like it's just some variation of a sea creature. And of course they built 2 Arctic roller coasters, which doesn't make any sense, so I'm glad that Pipeline has like a unique aesthetic. It has a very different vibe, which I greatly appreciate. Like it went from Arctic and sea creatures to Arctic sea creatures and surfing. So I feel like SeaWorld Orlando needs a different angle for a new roller coaster. I understand that the park is called SeaWorld, but theming every attraction to a different sea creature just makes them all feel kind of the same from like a theming perspective. So I'm glad they came in with a different angle with the Arctic, with Icebreaker and Penguin Trek. But again, they themed 2 rides to the same thing, which is really weird, and they're in completely different corner of the park. I'm completely getting off track here, but I'm glad that Pipeline has its own theme, and it really contributes variety to the rest of the park, which I really like. I feel like the entrance sign looks absolutely amazing. It looks beautiful. The coaster has a blue track with white supports, and it because it has a surfing theme, it really reminds me of Hang Time in terms of aesthetics. Hang Time at Knott's Berry Farm. I feel like the 2 are pretty similar, so I think that's really cool. When you enter the queue, you might have to wait a while. The queue is actually built kind of similarly to the queue of Hang Time, so it's like 2 switchbacks in a really long cattle pin, and you might have to wait in that a while because dispatches on this attraction were pretty slow in my experience, which is a pretty big disappointment. I wish that they were a little faster, but it wasn't terrible like Iron Gwazi at Busch Gardens Tampa. Another thing that I noticed is that the queue itself had like a light dusting of sand on the ground, which made it feel completely different in terms of like texture. I have no idea if that was intentional or not. Like, I don't know if they actually dusted the queue with sand on the floor or if they just didn't brush up the queue, but I thought it was actually pretty clever and pretty unique. It wasn't enough sand to like get inside your shoes, but it was enough so that you could feel yourself walking on it, which I thought was unique and actually kind of clever. So whether it was intentional or not, I actually really like it in terms of theming. Like, that's actually kind of smart. But anyway, when you get up to the station, when I was there, I was able to pick my row. They didn't have a grouper. The line for the front row can be very long. Like, they have a lot of queue space for the front row. So and as I said, those dispatches take forever, and this is only one of 2 B&Ms that are only 2 across seating in the United States, and of course the other one is literally in the same park, so that's really funny. But that means that the line for the front row can take a while. I did wait for the front row because I really wanted to do it, because I heard it was the best row, and in my opinion it is the best row on Pipeline, so you might have to wait for that experience, which is kind of a shame. Hopefully it can be not like me and go on a day where this park is empty, because from what I understand, SeaWorld Orlando is usually empty. From my visit in 2020 and 2021, I remember the park being very empty. So when it's your turn to ride, whatever row you're in, you're gonna have to get inside of this vest thing. So I'm a pretty tall dude, which is gonna to be pretty important for this review. I'm 6 foot nothing, so getting into the bike seat was pretty interesting. For traditional B&M stand-ups, I haven't really had a problem because I feel like the over-the-shoulder restraint, it'll go higher up than the vest restraints on Pipeline. So because they're higher up, they're like completely out of the way, so you can focus on getting yourself on top of the bike seat, and then you pull down the over-the-shoulder restraints. But because the vest restraint is like not fully out of the way, it can be kind of difficult to slide your head back into it and then get yourself on top of the bike seat. So my first ride, it was not graceful at all. I feel like my second and third ride, I was a little smoother getting in and out. I probably should have focused on getting on the bike seat first before getting into the vest, but I felt like I had to get my head into the vest before I got myself on top of the bike seat. So it was just a little clustered, a little clumsy. I kind of wish that the vest went a little higher just to get out of the way so that it would be easier to get in, but that's kind of a nitpick. Like, it wasn't that big of a deal. So these trains are really interesting. When I first got in it, I kept like bouncing up and down, and something I didn't realize until after my first ride is that the max out on the height is not that tall. I guess a lot of coaster nerds are really short people. I heard like amazing reviews about spectacular airtime that'll just throw you up off of the board, but on my first ride on Pipeline, I was really disappointed because the airtime felt like me on top of my tippy toes. Like, that's as high out as I would go. So I feel like the max out on the restraints is only like 6'3" or 6'4". I didn't fully leave the board, so I was really disappointed. So the airtime felt really limited. It felt very restricted and disappointing because I was expecting to get thrown out of my seat, but I guess I'm too tall for Pipeline the surf coaster. I did try to remedy that on my second and third ride by getting as low as possible. So I would bend my knees and try to like basically sit on the bike seat before all of the airtime moments, and that did help a lot. So just know, if you're like around my height, like 6 foot, if you're taller than me, you're gonna have a real problem with Pipeline the surf coaster in terms of airtime. Like, if that's not your thing, if you don't care about airtime, if you just want to feel the positive G's, then you should be fine. But you should want to feel the airtime because this is a really unique roller coaster. It's a really unique sensation that I haven't felt on anything else before. It's not anything that anyone else has ever felt on anything before because it's the first of its kind. It's unique, you know? It's a prototype experience. That being said, though, the problems that I did have with getting in the restraint and the problems that I have with the limited airtime on my first ride experience, it made me hope that B&M develops like sit down trains with this bouncing motion. I thought I heard that they did, but I haven't heard anything in a long time, so I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if they're working on it or if they just haven't had anyone buy it. What I'd really want to see is an attraction that would run both these stand-up trains and the sit down iteration of them with the bouncing seats. I feel like that could be really cool. I would like to see another surf coaster somewhere because we're about to dig into this layout, and I feel like B&M was pretty conservative with this layout and the choices that they made. So let's start things off. I got 2 rides in the back row, 1 in the front row. My first ride was in the back row, and that was the one that I left very disappointed with. So when I waited for the front row, I wanted to make sure that I felt every ounce of that airtime, so I stayed as low as possible for as long as possible, and I feel like that helped the ride experience. And then of course I wanted to try the back row again just to see if doing that would help out, and it did. So yeah, it's just it's kind of frustrating that you have to ride the ride a certain way to feel the forces. Like, Mako is still my favorite attraction at SeaWorld Orlando, and you can ride that ride however you want and you're still gonna feel the amazing airtime. It's kind of disappointing having to ride this attraction a specific way to feel the forces. Like, that's just pretty annoying. Like, come on, man. I just want to enjoy the roller coaster. So you're gonna start things off with that launch. It was pretty gradual in my opinion. Like, it didn't feel great. There's a decent burst at the beginning, but that's about it. The main standout about this launch is the fact that it has an airtime hill on the launch, and this is interesting. So to me, there are 5 airtime moments on Pipeline, and this is the first one, and you're gonna feel it in both the front and the back. But to me, it didn't really feel like airtime. It just kind of felt like the floor suddenly vanished, and then you would land before you curve up into this first element. So I don't know, like, I was a little disappointed because it didn't feel like I was getting thrown out of my seat. It just kind of felt like the floor floor disappeared, which is a very unique sensation. It's totally bizarre. And another thing about Pipeline that I didn't know going into it is the fact that the seats don't fall at the speed of gravity. They have like a little dampener, or they have a restriction or something that makes you land like really slow and unnatural. And I don't know if I'm a fan of it. I assume that's to prevent injury from someone like landing awkward or landing weird, but it's just like, I don't know, it's like artificially extending your airtime, which is very unique. It's very bizarre, but I don't know if I like it, you know? It just caught me off guard because the floor disappeared and then you expect to fall suddenly, but you just kind of slowly float down back into your board before the coaster curves up into this first turn, which by the way is kind of a wasted first element. You get no airtime. It's just kind of basic. I mean, it is visually appealing, which I really like, but like it's not an inversion. It's not anything. It's just a turn. As I discussed in my RMC ranking video, I feel like turning is the most boring thing any roller coaster can do. So it's a little disappointing that Pipeline starts off with just a generic overbank, and you don't get airtime, obviously. In the back row, you might pop out of your seat just a little bit, but it's very brief and it's not very noteworthy. So after that, you're going to curve up into the best part of the ride for both the front and the back, which is this twisted camelback. You get thrown out of your seat, but as I said, for me, if I'm standing normally, it's only like thrown 3 inches off the board, which when you're standing doesn't feel like that much. Like, it's just me on my tippy toes. Like, I'm doing this motion right now and my line of sight doesn't really change that much. So it wasn't, I mean, it's fun, it's unique, it's interesting, but I set my expectations way too high after hearing how much praise it was getting. So I guess it met my expectations, especially after I started to get as low as possible, but I don't know. It still left me a little disappointed. Roller coasters are an expectations thing, and I feel like I ruined my my Pipeline experience by setting them too high. Because before the ride opened, I was expecting this ride to be a disaster, and it's not a disaster. It's fun, it's unique, it's interesting. It's just not as great as everyone is saying it is, in my opinion. So, and I feel like my disappointment with this element reflects with the entire ride experience, because this is well regarded as the best part. It's just, you know. I really want to try it again with this perspective in mind, because I feel like if I do it again, then I'll actually like it more. My first impression was a little disappointing. So after that, you're going to crest up into the only inversion on the attraction, which is a corkscrew. It's not whippy, there's no hang time, so you kind of just breeze through it without any seat motion, so it kind of feels like a wasted element again. So there's been 3 elements so far, and 2 of them feel wasted, and this ride isn't that long, so it's just kind of meh, you know? Like, I feel like this ride didn't have to go upside down, so I don't know why they included it, especially since they have rides like Kraken, they have Manta, both of which have some really wild inversions, so I don't know why they felt like they had to include an inversion on Pipeline. Maybe just to see what would happen. Like, I would love to see a surf coaster have an inversion that would be more hang time focused, because I imagine that the seats extending upside down during a hang time moment, that could be wild. That would be really interesting. Maybe B&M thought that it wouldn't be safe for riders, so they kind of just went with this proportional generic corkscrew. Even a 0G roll, it would be interesting to see how these trains would behave in a 0G roll, but I'm no engineer. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just telling you how I felt riding the thing. One thing I forgot to mention is that this attraction has a splashdown element in between the corkscrew and the twisted airtime hill. It's pretty cute. I didn't notice it on the ride, and honestly off ride it wasn't as big as I thought it would be, but it's still cute. It's interesting. I feel like Manta's is still way better because you actually like notice it. You even feel it on that ride, which is wild. So the one on Pipeline is kind of underwhelming compared to the one on Manta. So after that, you're gonna hit a trim, which I didn't really notice on any of my rides. The front row, this is a very solid airtime moment. It's the 3rd out of the 5 airtime moments, but the thing is, in the back row, you're not gonna feel anything. So this is one of the major reasons that this ride is much better in the front row, because you get that extra pop of airtime, which again, this layout is pretty short, so that one extra pop of airtime goes a long way. After that, you're gonna turn down and around into a couple of helixes. Before I rode, I was under the impression that Pipeline was much more comfortable than traditional stand-up coasters, but the positive G's on your legs feel exactly like the positive G's on your legs on the old stand-up coasters. So I kind of left confused because I was like, that felt pretty similar to what I've experienced before, especially during those helixes, because it's just like, it feels exactly like Riddler's Revenge. So maybe it's because I wasn't bending my knees and I didn't realize that until I was reflecting on my ride experience on Pipeline. Next time I get to SeaWorld Orlando, I'm gonna try to bend my knees during these elements to see if that makes a difference, but I was just standing normally and it felt just like the positives during the turns on Riddler Revenge. I was a little disappointed with that as well. After that, you're gonna crest up into another airtime moment. It's solid, it's fine. It feels like a toned down version of the first Twisted Hill. It was interesting. This is one of those moments where I also felt like the dampener on the descent was really present. So it is what it is. You're going to hit another turn, and then you're going to start making your way back towards the station, but you're going to go through this S-hill, which honestly felt a lot like a twisted version of the first hill on the ride, which is the launched hill. It felt like the floor just disappeared from under you, which is a unique and interesting feeling, as I talked about. It's just not a fantastic airtime moment, you know? So it's just interesting, you know? This whole ride just wasn't what I expected, you know? And after that, you're going to hit the brakes. One thing that I have been glossing over is the fact that these trains do shake. I wouldn't describe it as a rattle, I would describe it as a shake. Like, you can feel it. It's not uncomfortable, it doesn't hurt, it's just annoying. And I assume that's because the trains are pretty top heavy, so it kind of rattles throughout the layout, because obviously the closer you are to the track, the smoother the ride experience will be. And riders standing, just by nature, you're going to be further away from the track, which lends itself to a bit of a shake, which is kind of a shame though, because this ride is brand new. And I would argue that it felt a lot like Riddler's Revenge in terms of smoothness. Like, Riddler isn't rough, it just has that same shake that Pipeline has. So I feel like that's just a problem that any stand-up coaster ever is going to have. So overall, this ride just was not as comfortable as I was led to believe it would be. I thought it would be a lot more comfortable than the stand-ups, and I left thinking it's a lot more fun than the stand-up coaster that I've been on. But in terms of comfort, it's around the same. Like, I didn't have a problem with Riddler in terms of like groin pinching or anything, because I heard about those problems for years before I rode Riddler's Revenge. So every time I ride a traditional stand-up, I try to lock in a little lower and then stand up above the bike seat so I have more room to work with. So I've never had those issues on a stand-up coaster. And of course, you're just, by nature of the design of Pipeline, you're not going to have those issues because the bike seat moves with you, so it's impossible to hit it, which is really nice. I really like that you don't have to lock the restraint in a certain way to ride comfortably. So that's an element I appreciate. But because I've been doing that on the stand-up coasters, it felt the same in terms of comfort. Like, I've never been in pain on Riddler's Revenge, and I've never been in pain on Pipeline the Surf Coaster. I've felt the pressure on my legs during the positive G-forces. I felt those on Riddler, and I felt those on Pipeline. And in terms of shakiness, I felt that on Riddler, and I felt that on Pipeline. So it kind of just felt the same to me, you know? Which I feel like is what left me a little disappointed. On one of my rides, when I was in the back row, the dude in front of me yelled out something that was really, really funny, that kind of referred to the pain that you might feel on a stand-up coaster. I'm not going to say it here. I'll type it out in the description if you really want to know, because I thought it was really hilarious, and it kind of describes like the shakiness of the ride, so it's something worth mentioning. So I was just disappointed with Pipeline. I guess it's an airtime machine, but it's not like the wild throw you off the board airtime that I was hoping for. And maybe I'm just too tall, you know, even when I get down, maybe I'm not able to get back down after one of those airtime moments. Pipeline the Surf Coaster and airline seats are two of the biggest downsides of being relatively tall, so that's kind of a shame. I was hoping for more from this attraction. I walked away thinking that it's just a mildly uncomfortable launch coaster with a couple decent airtime moments, but you know, I was hoping for more. I heard some people rank this as second best roller coaster at SeaWorld Orlando. I don't know if I agree with that. It's really, really hard to rank this roller coaster because it's so unique. So it's something that you have to go out and experience. And I'm really glad that I got to experience, and I hope I get to experience it again, because I want to ride this thing more. I want to see if my perspective changes, and I feel like it will. So This is just one of those really fascinating roller coasters that I want to lap as many times as possible. I also want to see more variations of this layout because the corkscrew was pretty disappointing. The turn after the launch feels like a wasted element. I feel like the twisted finale could be replaced with like more airtime hills, you know? So I would love to see an attraction with this style of seating, whether that's seated or standing, with an airtime focused layout. Like, as I mentioned, this thing has 5 airtime pops, but I want to see something with like double that, you know? Like just an out and back roller coaster, airtime hill, airtime hill, airtime hill. Maybe like a hyper style layout, like a lot of people have been saying with these types of trains. That could be super interesting. So B&M has a really interesting concept. I just hope that height discrimination isn't a thing going forward. And if it is, then I'm going to have to accommodate myself by getting as low as possible. So for both stand-ups, I'm going to have to ride in a certain way to experience the attraction. So is it an improvement? Yes. Like, I made a video talking about Pipeline for how long has it been? This recording, as of now, before I edit it, is almost 30 minutes long, and I don't think I could even talk about Riddler for half as long as I've talked about Pipeline, so I guess that's a win for B&M. It's really interesting, it's fun to watch, and I want to try it again. So that's my main takeaway from Pipeline the Surf Coaster. Let me know what you think about this ride. Am I being a little too harsh? Please let me know in the comments below, especially if you're my height, like 6 foot or taller. I want to know what you think about Pipeline. No offense to anyone shorter, but I feel like most people really like it who are like 5'9" or so, you know? So thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you later.